What happens when one of Britain's most beloved television hosts comes face to face with one of the most controversial figures in recent royal history? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits down with Lorraine Kelly in what was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. The tension was palpable from the moment the cameras started rolling, but nobody could have predicted the explosive confrontation that would leave viewers absolutely stunned and one guest storming off set in a fit of rage. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouse women clash in the most dramatic television moment of the year. The morning started like any other at the ITV studios in London. Lorraine Kelly, known for her warm Scottish charm and no-nonsense approach to interviewing, was preparing for what her producers had described as a straightforward chat about Meghan's latest philanthropic ventures. The Duchess of Sussex had agreed to appear via satellite link from her Montecito mansion, supposedly eager to discuss her new initiative supporting women's education in developing countries. Behind the scenes, however, tensions were already brewing. Sources close to the production revealed that Meghan's team had submitted an extensive list of topics that were absolutely off-limits. No questions about the royal family, no mention of recent controversies, no discussion of her relationship with her father Thomas Markle, and absolutely no reference to the ongoing speculation about her marriage to Prince Harry. The list was so comprehensive that it left Lorraine's research team wondering what exactly they were supposed to talk about for a full 20-minute segment. She basically wanted us to treat her like she was promoting a bloody rom-com, one anonymous crew member later confided. But this is Lorraine Kelly we're talking about. She's not going to just sit there and lob softball questions for 20 minutes while pretending the elephant in the room doesn't exist. As the live broadcast began, viewers immediately noticed something was off. Meghan appeared on screen from her California home office, perfectly lit and styled, but there was a coldness in her demeanor that was impossible to ignore. Gone was the warm, engaging persona she had cultivated during her acting days. Instead, she sat rigid in her chair, arms crossed defensively, offering only clipped responses to Lorraine's opening pleasantries. "Meghan, lovely to see you this morning." Lorraine began with her characteristic warmth, though keen observers could detect a slight edge in her voice. "You're looking wonderful. How are things in sunny California?" "Thank you, Lorraine. Things are good. We're very focused on our work," Meghan replied tersely, already signaling that she wasn't interested in small talk. The use of "we" wasn't lost on anyone, clearly establishing that any discussion would need to acknowledge her status as part of a power couple. The first red flag came when Lorraine attempted to steer the conversation toward Meghan's childhood and what had inspired her current charitable work. It was an innocent enough question, designed to humanize the guest and create a connection with viewers. But Meghan's response was unexpectedly sharp. "I think we should focus on the future rather than dwelling on the past, don't you think, Lorraine? The work we're doing now is what matters." The dismissive tone was unmistakable, and veteran television viewers could sense that this wasn't going to be the friendly chat the producers had planned. Lorraine, with decades of experience handling difficult guests, maintained her professional composure but pressed on. "Of course, but I think our viewers would love to know what drives you. What made you passionate about education?" "What drives me," Meghan said, emphasizing each word deliberately, "is seeing real change in the world. Not just talking about it, but actually doing something meaningful. Unlike some people who are content to just sit in television studios and gossip about other people's lives." The studio fell silent. Even the seasoned camera operators seemed to pause mid-shot. Meghan had just delivered a thinly veiled insult to not only Lorraine but to the entire format of daytime television. The accusation that Lorraine was merely a gossip peddler rather than a legitimate journalist was inflammatory enough, but the condescending delivery made it even worse. Lorraine's smile remained fixed, but those who knew her well could see the flash of anger in her eyes. She had been in television for over 30 years, had interviewed everyone from prime ministers to pop stars, and had built her reputation on treating guests with respect while asking the questions viewers wanted answered. Being lectured about journalistic integrity by someone who had spent barely 3 years in the public eye was not going to slide. "That's interesting, Meghan," Lorraine responded, her Scottish accent becoming slightly more pronounced. Always a warning sign for those familiar with her interviewing style. Because I think our viewers appreciate honest conversations about real people and real issues. They don't want to be preached to, or have their intelligence insulted." The gauntlet had been thrown down. Meghan's perfectly composed facade began to crack as she realized that Lorraine wasn't going to be intimidated or manipulated into conducting the interview on her terms. This was live television, and there was nowhere to hide. "I'm not preaching to anyone," Meghan shot back, her voice rising slightly. "I'm trying to have a serious conversation about important issues, but it seems like you're more interested in creating drama for your ratings." "Drama?" Lorraine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Meghan, love, I've been doing this job since before you knew what a camera was. I don't need to create drama. I just ask questions that people want answered. And right now, I'm wondering why you're being so defensive about perfectly reasonable questions." The tension was becoming unbearable for everyone involved. Meghan's media training was clearly kicking in as she attempted to regain control of the narrative. But she was dealing with a seasoned professional who had seen every trick in the book. The power dynamic she was accustomed to, where her status and connections usually ensured deferential treatment, was completely absent in this setting. "I'm not being defensive," Meghan insisted, though her body language suggested otherwise. She was leaning forward now, her previous composed posture abandoned. "I'm just trying to understand why you seem more interested in my personal life than the important work I'm doing to help people." "But that's just it, isn't it?" Lorraine replied, her voice taking on the tone she reserved for politicians who were trying to dodge difficult questions. "Your personal life and your public work aren't separate things. You've made your personal story part of your brand, part of how you sell your charitable initiatives. You can't have it both ways. You can't use your personal experiences to gain sympathy and support when it suits you, then claim they're off-limits when someone asks legitimate questions." The observation was devastating in its accuracy, and Meghan's reaction made it clear that Lorraine had hit a nerve. The carefully constructed narrative that had been Meghan's shield since leaving royal life was being systematically dismantled by someone who understood exactly how the media game was played. For a moment, Meghan sat in stunned silence, her mouth slightly open as she processed what had just been said to her on live television. This wasn't the kind of respectful deference she had become accustomed to from American media outlets. This was a British journalist doing what British journalists do best, cutting straight through the bullshit to get to the truth underneath. That's completely unfair," Meghan finally managed, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're twisting everything I say and making it seem like I'm some kind of manipulator." "I'm not twisting anything, love," Lorraine replied calmly, though her eyes remained steely. "I'm just pointing out the contradiction in your position. You want to be a public figure when it benefits you, but you want privacy when people ask difficult questions. That's not how it works." The conversation was spiraling beyond what anyone had anticipated. In the ITV control room, producers were frantically gesturing at each other, unsure whether to cut to a commercial break or let the train wreck continue. The viewing figures were already spiking as word spread on social media about the explosive interview taking place live on morning television. "You know what your problem is, Lorraine," Meghan said, her composure completely abandoned now. The mask had finally slipped, revealing something much uglier underneath. "You're just another bitter British journalist who can't stand the fact that I moved on and created a better life for myself. You're all the same, obsessed with tearing people down instead of building them up." The personal attack was a massive miscalculation. Lorraine Kelly was beloved by British audiences precisely because she was seen as genuine, warm, and fair. Attacking her character on her own show was like walking into a lion's den covered in raw meat. But more than that, it revealed exactly the kind of entitled, victim mentality thinking that had made Meghan so unpopular with large sections of the British public. Bitter? Lorraine's Scottish accent was now in full force, a sure sign that her patience had reached its limit. "Love, I've got nothing to be bitter about. I've got a career I love, a family I adore, and the respect of my peers. I don't need to move to another country and spend my time complaining about how badly I was treated to make myself feel important." The studio audience, usually carefully managed to remain quiet during interviews, audibly gasped. Lorraine had just delivered a devastating blow that addressed not just Meghan's behavior during the interview, but her entire approach to life since leaving the royal family. The implication was clear. While others got on with their lives and careers, Meghan seemed perpetually focused on grievances and victimhood. "How dare you?" Meghan hissed, her carefully modulated American accent slipping to reveal something harder underneath. "You have no idea what I've been through. The racism, the death threats, the complete lack of support from institutions that were supposed to protect me. And now you're sitting there in your comfortable little studio, judging me like you have any clue what it's like to have the entire British press trying to destroy you." "The entire British press?" Lorraine shot back, her voice rising for the first time in the interview. "That's interesting, because I seem to remember quite a few publications being very supportive of you when you first came on the scene. The problem is, you couldn't handle even the slightest bit of criticism or scrutiny. The moment anyone asked a legitimate question about your behavior or your family situation, it was racism. The moment anyone suggested you might have made a mistake, it was a conspiracy against you." The confrontation had now moved far beyond the original topic of charitable work. This was becoming a full-scale examination of Meghan's entire approach to public life, and she was losing badly. Her usual tactics, playing the victim, invoking racism, attacking the questioner's motives, were all being systematically dismantled by someone who had seen it all before. "That's not true," Meghan protested. But even she seemed to realize how weak the response sounded. "There were legitimate issues that needed to be addressed. The way I was treated was completely different from how other members of the family were treated, and everyone knows why." "Do they, though?" Lorraine pressed, sensing weakness. "Because what I saw was a woman who married into the most famous family in the world, was given unprecedented support and opportunities, and then threw it all away because she couldn't handle the fact that being royal means following rules and putting duty before personal desires. And when it didn't work out the way you wanted, you decided to burn the whole thing down and blame everyone else for your problems." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Every person watching knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. A complete demolition of the carefully constructed public persona that Meghan had spent years building. But more than that, it was a moment of truth that many British viewers had been waiting for since the Sussex drama began. Meghan's face had gone through several color changes during Lorraine's assessment, settling on a pale fury that made her look almost unrecognizable from her usual composed public appearances. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. "You fucking bitch," she spat, the profanity hitting the morning television audience like a slap. "You think you're so clever, sitting there with your smug little smile, pretending to be some kind of moral authority? You're just another tabloid hack who's built a career on other people's misery." The F-word on morning television was shocking enough, but the sheer venom in Meghan's voice was what really stunned viewers. This wasn't the polished, media-trained duchess they thought they knew. This was someone whose mask had completely slipped, revealing a nastiness that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. "Well, that's lovely," Lorraine responded, maintaining her composure even in the face of such an outburst. "Really, showing that royal class there, aren't you? This is exactly what I'm talking about. The moment someone challenges you or asks difficult questions, you resort to personal attacks and foul language. Very dignified." But Meghan was beyond caring about dignity now. Years of carefully managed public appearances and scripted interviews had given way to pure, unfiltered emotion, and it wasn't pretty to watch. "Don't you dare lecture me about dignity," she screamed, leaning so close to her camera that her face filled the screen. "You wouldn't know dignity if it bit you on your fat Scottish arse. At least I've actually done something meaningful with my life instead of sitting in a television studio gossiping about celebrities for 30 fucking years." The silence that followed was deafening. Even by the standards of live television disasters, this was something unprecedented. Meghan had just delivered a profanity-laden tirade against one of Britain's most beloved television personalities on her own show, in front of millions of viewers. The control room was in chaos, with producers shouting instructions while frantically trying to decide whether to cut the feed or let the carnage continue. But if Meghan expected Lorraine to crumble under the assault, she had severely underestimated her opponent. The Scottish presenter sat back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, and absolutely lethal. "Meaningful?" Lorraine said, the word dripping with contempt. What exactly have you done that's so meaningful, Meghan? You married a prince, spent 18 months complaining about how difficult your life was, then ran away to America, where you've spent the last few years doing interviews about how badly you were treated. That's your meaningful contribution to the world? The question hung in the air like a sword about to fall, because when stripped of all the spin and publicity, that really was the sum total of Meghan's public life. She had no major charitable achievements, no significant policy changes to her name, no lasting impact on any of the causes she claimed to champion. Her entire celebrity was built on being a royal who quit being a royal. I've raised awareness, Meghan shot back, but even she seemed to realize how pathetic it sounded. I've given a voice to people who don't have one. Awareness? Lorraine laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. Love, you've raised awareness of yourself, that's about all. Every interview you do, every public appearance, every charitable initiative, it's all about Meghan. You couldn't raise awareness of a fire if you were standing in the middle of it holding a bloody megaphone. The assessment was brutal in its accuracy. Even Meghan's most ardent supporters would struggle to name a single cause that had genuinely benefited from her involvement beyond the publicity she generated for herself. Her charitable work seemed designed more to generate positive headlines than to create actual change. And as for giving people a voice, Lorraine continued, her tone becoming more savage with each word, the only voice you've given anyone is your own. Everything you touch becomes about your story, your struggles, your victimhood. You couldn't shine a spotlight on someone else if your life depended on it, because you can't bear not being the center of attention. Meghan's face was contorting with rage now, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the fury twisting her features. She was breathing heavily, clearly struggling to maintain any semblance of control. When she finally managed to speak, her voice was shaking with barely contained hysteria. "You're just jealous," she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "You're a dried-up old hag who spent her entire life kissing ass and playing it safe, while I had the courage to stand up for what's right. You're nothing but a pathetic bootlicker who's too scared to challenge the establishment because you might lose your precious little job." But Lorraine had heard enough. Rising from her chair with an authority that commanded attention, she fixed Meghan with a stare that could have melted steel. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 decades in television, and the moral authority that came from a lifetime of treating people with respect. "Right. That's enough," she said, her Scottish accent now thick as treacle. "I've been in this business long enough to spot a fraud when I see one, and that's exactly what you are, Meghan. You're a fraud who spent years playing the victim while treating everyone around you like servants. You came on this show thinking you could manipulate me the same way you manipulate everyone else, but you picked the wrong person on the wrong day." The words landed like physical blows. Meghan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, clearly unable to process that someone was finally speaking to her the way she deserved to be spoken to. The entitled, narcissistic behavior that had been indulged for so long was finally being called out in the most public way possible. "I've met real victims in my time," Lorraine continued, her voice rising with righteous anger. "I've interviewed women who've survived actual abuse, people who've overcome real prejudice, families who've lost everything and rebuilt their lives from nothing. And do you know what they all had in common? They didn't spend every waking moment talking about how hard done by they were. They got on with their lives and tried to make things better for other people." "You," Meghan tried to interrupt, but Lorraine was in full flow now. "But you?" Lorraine pressed on, pointing directly at the camera. "You had everything handed to you on a silver platter. A prince for a husband, a palace for a home, the support of an entire nation, and you threw it all away because you couldn't handle being asked to follow a few basic rules. And now you have the audacity to come on my show and lecture me about dignity while using language that would make a sailor blush?" Meghan was hyperventilating now, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, her composed mask completely shattered. She was jabbing at something off camera, clearly trying to get her team to end the interview, but the damage was already done. Millions of people had just witnessed her complete meltdown, and no amount of damage control could undo what had happened. "This is fucking ridiculous," she shrieked, her voice cracking with the strain. "I'm not going to sit here and be insulted by some washed-up has-been who wouldn't have a career if it wasn't for other people's drama. You're a nobody, Lorraine. A fucking nobody. who's never done anything important in her entire pathetic life. But Lorraine just smiled. The smile of someone who knew they had won completely and utterly. And yet, she said quietly, I'm not the one having a breakdown on live television, am I? I'm not the one who can't handle a few difficult questions without resorting to tantrums and foul language. I'm not the one who's just shown the entire world exactly what kind of person I really am underneath all the PR spin. That was the final straw. Meghan let out an inhuman shriek of rage and frustration, sweeping whatever was on her desk onto the floor with a crash that could be heard through her microphone. Papers went flying. Something that sounded like expensive equipment hit the ground, and through it all, she was screaming obscenities at the top of her lungs. Fuck you! Fuck this show! And fuck everyone watching! She yelled, standing up so violently that her chair fell backward. I'm done with this shit. You can all go to hell. And with that, Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, former royal and supposed champion of dignity and grace, reached forward and slammed her laptop shut, cutting her feed, and ending what would go down as one of the most spectacular celebrity meltdowns in television history. The ITV studio sat in stunned silence for several seconds, the only sound being the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of shocked voices from the crew. Lorraine, meanwhile, sat back in her chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had just taken out the trash. Well, she said finally, addressing the camera with the same warm smile she'd started the interview with. That was enlightening, wasn't it? I think we learned quite a lot about our guest today, though perhaps not what she intended us to learn. She paused, letting the moment sink in before delivering her final assessment. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed exactly why some people aren't cut out for public life. It takes more than good publicity and designer clothes to be a role model. It takes character, grace under pressure, and the ability to put others before yourself. Sadly, those aren't qualities that can be bought or borrowed. The interview was over, but the fallout was just beginning. Social media was already exploding with clips from the confrontation, and news outlets around the world were preparing their coverage of what would inevitably be dubbed Markle's meltdown. Meghan had wanted to promote her charitable work, but instead, she had revealed her true character to the world in the most public way possible. As the cameras finally stopped rolling, Lorraine Kelly remained in her chair, still smiling. After 30 years in television, she had seen everything. But this would go down as one of her finest moments, the day she refused to be intimidated by entitled celebrity privilege and showed the world that authentic integrity would always triumph over manufactured victimhood.